IT Fundamentals Plus, Module 4, Unit 4, using shared storage. At the end of this unit, you should be able to list ways to share files and storage in a local area network, describe means of sharing files and services on the internet, and explain the importance of backups and configure simple backup options. So a file server, direct attached storage, it's basically another way of how to provide resources to users in the network, specifically when it comes to shares. So any drive or any folder, so you could share an entire drive or you could share a folder of folders that are attached to the computer, right, on a shared network. Um, so you can have an internal drive, have storage, and share the contents of either that drive or folders. You can do that. So fixed disk and removable drives can also be shared. You can share a CD-ROM drive so that if you are connected with a computer that doesn't have a CD-ROM drive over the network, you can use the DVD on that shared computer. The host computer, which is the computer that actually has the resource that is being shared, obviously must be turned on and the drive remain attached for the share to work. Now um, there are also, we're going to be talking about that, in which you could buy a hard drive that is attached to the network, that it's not dependent on any computer, so that it doesn't matter whether that computer is on and off or available, so that share goes directly into the network. We're going to be talking about that next. And this is what it refers to as a network attached storage, or NAS. It's basically a server appliance which is dedicated for file sharing. You can buy this on any, go to Amazon.com, and if you want to. And the good thing is that because this goes on in the network, it's not dependent on a computer. And then even if you have a network at home, you can share this with all the devices in your house, and share content from there. Can be configured with multiple disks, like the one over there in the picture. Some of them comes in with maybe one or two disks, and you can expand, you can add more. A lot of small companies use this kind of technology. They support multiple file sharing protocols, and basically those are connected to the network, and they have an IP address, just like a computer or a printer, and that kind of stuff. So this is a great concept because, again, they are not dependent on any computer. We in a previous unit we went over the steps on how to share a network printer. So we already we've done this before. So we share the printer via Windows. You can share a locally installed printer. So you have a computer with a USB printer installed. You can share that printer. The printer can be connected to either the Windows by USB again, by Bluetooth, by Ethernet, by Wi-Fi. It doesn't matter. It could be shared. The Windows host must be switched on for the share to be accessible, of course, right? Use a hardware print server. So there are devices out there that are just dedicated for that. So you could also buy one of those, especially small offices, do that. Their network-enabled printers support direct connections to the clients. They could also connect. You could also connect printer to a NAS server or an internet router or modem, that kind of stuff. So all of this is part of the tasks that as IT people we do when it comes to networking. And this is the beauty of networking. Obviously, you got to be careful with security because you don't want to share something that you're not supposed to. But this is what make a network so productive, so that you can share these resources. So you don't need to buy a printer for every computer. Of course, you can just have one printer and share that with people in your office. Okay. So In Windows, you join a computer either to a work group or a domain. Obviously, a group is basically like a home network or a very small network. There's no dedicated computers, and no computer uh, is a specific to the server. Now, you only see this in like home networks, and we're not going to be talking about that much. What you're going to see in an enterprise, what is called a domain. Okay, and a domain is you have what is called a domain controller, and then that domain controller, obviously, you could have more than one. You should have more than one domain controller. So most corporates have more than one. Basically, Windows provides the client and the server software required for file sharing. So when you have a domain controller, um, so all those computers are members of that domain, and then anyone within that domain can share stuff. So usually the way it goes is the domain controller. Um, contains a database with all the users and all the groups, and you can publish all the shares and everything. So everything is it's like so you have like a central place where authentication is controlled through the domain controller. So when you go to a corporation, they create an account for you on Active Directory, which is called when you have a domain, you have Active Directory on a domain controller all over the network, and then those resources are shared and controlled through that. So domain controller again is that main server that does the identification, authentication of the users and all the resources. And we'll see that um, how that works out in our demos. Okay, right. So now, um, when we were over sharing the printers in our previous units, again, share any folder via shortcut menu or folder property, so you can decide who you want to share that with, whether you want to share with the entire company or just a specific group of people or even an individual. It is a best practice in networking, especially Microsoft recommends this a lot, that when you share resources, it's good to have groups. So you create a group. Even if you have a person, you can create a group, and then later on, so normally the way it works in a corporation is that you have different departments. You have HR department, you have engineering, you have development, you have you name it, right? You have the secretaries, right? That all the secretaries need to access a specific folder or printer. So you create a group, what is called a security group, which we will see later on. You add all the secretaries to that group, and then you just you share the resources with that security group, and all the members of that group then will have that. And then you can give different level of access, whether you want the content of the folder they just wanted to read, or you want to read and write and that kind of stuff. Again, in a work group, each computer must be separately configured with the same username account. A work group is not practical for a large company, even a medium company, because again, if you have, let's say, actually, in Microsoft there's limitations. So basically, it's 10 computers. So, like if you share a printer, in the versions of Windows 7, Windows 10, if you share a printer, only 10 people can print at the same time. The 11th person won't be able to print. That's one of the limitations. And then you have all these accounts all over that you need to manage. In a domain controller, in a domain environment, you basically have one account in a central location, and you manage everything from there. So when a user is let go or fired or resigns or whatever, you disable that account, and basically that user do not have access to anything in the company. If you have multiple computers, a nightmare. So again, work groups are only like for home computers, or maybe an office with 2 or 3 computers. Buying a server and configuring a domain, it's sometimes too complex and expensive for very small offices in home groups. But in an enterprise, actually, and I'm going to be demoing both the domain and the work group in some of the exercises we're going to be looking at. All right. So again, file and print sharing part two. When you go to the advanced sharing, there's a couple of things you can do. By default, you know, you can, if you have several network, usually when you have networking, you have what is called the private network and then the public network, and you can turn off things on the public network. Especially if you share, you know, a router at home with other people, stuff like that. So we'll see how this works when we are looking at the. It's better to do this in a demo than trying to explain this here. All right. So once a share, I have a folder that is being shared over the network or a drive. How do I access that? How do I browse for those things? Well, so basically, when you go to networks or you go to, you're gonna see, even when you go to my PC, you're gonna see those network shares. So you'll see, you know, the drives that are being shared. Also, there are ways in which you can map those folders that are shared. So you can put it right on your desktop, or you can, you know, put a shortcut so that you can access that. So you view computers, printers, routers, network share infrastructure, and other devices via the what is called the network object. So there's an object, just like this PC, there is an object called network, and when you double click on that, then you'll have access to, and we'll see over here a drive that is being shared there. You can see that. Also, we in one of the exercises that we did, we talk about the concept of the UNC, the Universal Naming Convention, which is the kind of network name that is used when you are sharing either a printer or a folder. And again, so we'll do more exercises about that. But the way it goes is that if you right-click on any folder that is being shared, one of the options is to map a shared folder as a local drive. So basically, that share folder, which is in another computer, then it is mapped locally to your local drive. So when you go to your drives, you'll see a drive that says, oh, and you'll notice that it has like a little network thing attached to it. It basically means that is a folder that it is shared in a computer on another. It's shared on another computer. And again, so we'll demo all of these things, and that will make a lot more sense. Okay. All right. So hosted sharing and storage. HTTP, HTTPS, and file download. So when you download a file from the internet, so you could either download or you can upload files to, let's say, a web server, right? Clients can download using a link or URL over HTTPS. So HTTPS. So basically, what it means is that there may be an FTP site. It's kind of FTP stands for the File Transfer Protocol. A lot of Microsoft, for example, has an FTP site in which sometimes they, when you are troubleshooting with Microsoft and they need certain files from you, certain logs, they'll give you a site where it says, "I want you to upload those logs to this site." And they'll give you the instruction. Here's the link. Here's the username and password, and then you can do that. A lot of companies have internally an FTP site. And then that FTP site, it used to be very popular in the old days where there was an FTP site for you to go and download software and upload and that kind of stuff. Nowadays, you still can do that, but it's not as popular as it used to be because especially the FTP protocol, there's been a lot of issues with security, so it's not as popular as it used to be. But anyway, so File Transfer Protocol, FTP, is more efficient than HTTP and HTTPS to manage software, to download software. So yes, most of the time nowadays you go to websites and you say click on this link, and that's the way that you download software. But Um, so again, because of the security concerns, FTP are not those that popular. Most browsers support basic FTP functionality, but a dedicated FTP client is usually a preferable way of doing this. And again, so we'll demo some of these things just to demonstrate how this works. Cloud computing, extremely, almost nowadays, almost everybody uses cloud computing. So again, cloud computing basically means that your data is stored in the cloud. So if you use Google, if you have a Gmail account, you have Google Drive. It means that you can store data on the cloud rather than having that locally in your computer. That's simple as that, right? Some services are a per use. So Google Drive gives you a certain amount of storage for free. I believe it's about, I think it's 15 gigabyte free with a Gmail account, or 8 or 15. If you want more, and then obviously then you have to pay for that. Now, Microsoft, Google, Amazon Web Services, those are some of the bigger players out there, where there are entire companies. For example, Netflix, which I'm pretty sure you all know, have vast amount of, imagine all the content that Netflix have. Because videos take a lot of space. Huge amounts of storage in basically everything that they have. It's on the cloud. It's on Amazon Web Services. So tons of companies do not have servers. They don't have computers. They basically just the workers. The people who work for the company. They have laptops and stuff like that. But everything is stored in the cloud. The cloud depends on what is called resource pooling and virtualization. So even when we do the labs on IT Pro TV, that comes, so those labs are stored in the cloud, using virtualization. So cloud computing, it's a very popular technology, and it's basically the future. Every day, more and more companies are hosting their stuff in the cloud. One of the things about virtualization in clouds is that there's less visibility and control about where your data is. So when you host the stuff in the cloud, yes, you lose that visibility. You don't know what it is, and you don't care, right? Well, in some aspects, so obviously, if you have a multinational company, sometimes there are laws in which, for example, the data of if a company has offices in the United States and in Europe, maybe all the stuff related to the United States has to be stored in the United States, and data for the Europe office have to be stored in Europe, and that kind of stuff. But Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they have data centers all over the world, and basically what they do is that they host that data closer to where the users are, right? So again, cloud-based storage, very popular. Vendors like Apple, Google, Microsoft, Dropbox, Amazon. A lot of people use those. Microsoft OneDrive is very popular. They have two versions. Most of this company have two versions. The free version that you get when you create an account, and then the enterprise level version when you have a subscription to one of those enterprise to the enterprise features. All right, so let's talk now about cloud-based collaborative applications. So very familiar with Google, like Google Sheets and the Google word processing, stuff like that, where basically you have these documents stored in the cloud, and you can collaborate. You can share those documents, and people all over the world can update a spreadsheet, and basically it's done instantaneously all over the world. It's actually amazing. It's really, really good. So again, for the enterprise level, so you have Office, Microsoft Office 365 is a big player. Google G Suite, it's also a big player, and also and also Amazon. There's some more. There's a lot more, but those are some of the most popular ones. Okay. Peer-to-peer file sharing basically mean files that are uploaded to a network of peers. Each peer holds a fragment of files. Some of you may be familiar with like the BitTorrent content, where you have basically a little software, the BitTorrent client. You install it, and then you become part of that peer-to-peer file sharing all over the world. Um, they have their use, but they're also very dangerous. There's a lot of viruses and Trojan horses on this peer-to-peer file sharing. So I would encourage you to be very cautious if you do that, to download movies or music and stuff like that. It is extremely dangerous to, because you're downloading content from all over the world. And remember, a Trojan horse is a file that seems to be usable, but maybe it's not. It's disguised as a useful program or file, but it may be a virus that is hidden behind that file. We have talked many times that one of the most important security controls that you can have is backups. Okay, you have to back up your data files so that if something happens, if your computer fails, if it crashes, if there is a fire, then you can recover that. And again, cloud computing is an excellent option for those backups. Windows come with a backup program that you can use to back up your system, so you can actually back up, stuff locally, or you could back up stuff in the cloud. So either or. Or you could also make a backup of your entire computer, kind of like a mirror. So if anything happens, you can restore the computer exactly the way it was. Again, when you back up, some consideration should be whether are you gonna back up on site versus off site. Most company have they must have a backup off site, because again, if the building where a company is located, if there is a fire or there is a storm of something and you lose all that data, you could be into big trouble. So a lot of companies use basically what they do, they have the main data site, and then they have what is called a DR, or a recovery site, data recovery site. And basically that data recovery site has almost everything that if something happens to the primary site, then you can get it from there. The backup media security. So if you back up to whatever you back up to, you could back up to many places, right? You could back up, some files to a DVD, or you could back it up to USB drive, or you could back up to network to a NAS, attached storage, right? But it's important that the backup is secure, that you have security, because if someone steals the backup and they can read the content, then again, that's a security breach there, right? Point in time backup, it's another important thing. So in other words, how often are you going to back up? Maybe there is a folder that it's updated constantly that you want to back it up every hour of the day, because maybe there is a database that is with a lot of clients and it's updated constantly. And then if there is a failure, you lose only 1 hour of work. All the things have to be back up, almost like immediately. So there's many types of backups that we're going to be talking about that. And obviously, so you need to do backup schedule. So you want to back up. It depends on the data. There's some data that if you back it up once a day, that's fine. But there's all the data that have to be backed up every hour or every 3 hours and so forth. Maybe there is a whole system that if you back it up once a week, it's fine. So again, it depends on the data, and we will talk about that some other point. Now, what are some of the backup storage types over there? But again, locally attached storage, that's one way. Network attached storage, which is basically attached to the network. We just talked about cloud-based backup, off-site stuff. There are a lot of companies that, for a fee, obviously, will back up all your stuff in the cloud. It's important sometimes to use multiple methods for comprehensive backup. Local storage for regular point-in-time backups, and then cloud storage for periodic off-site backup. So you can have a local backup, right? And then that local backup, it's backup off-site. So if something happens locally, you can restore from that. But if something happens to the entire site, then you have, so basically you have the data that you're working with, you have a backup of that data, and then you have backup of the backup. So the idea is that at any given time, you have at least 3 copies of critical and important data. File backups in critical data. So again, it all depends on the type of data that you're backing up. So if you have a folder with extremely, sensitive data, so again, that maybe needs a schedule, right? More frequent than other thing. So where is the critical data stored? So again, if you have data that is critical, that have PII information, the personal identifiable thing, like for example, a hospital with medical records, right? You're gonna be extremely careful. Actually, there are laws that mandate, how the data, where the data need to be backed up and that kind of stuff. So some of the questions you ask: where is the critical data stored? Do the locations selector cover all critical files, for example, right? So those kind of the questions that you should ask. Databases. So database is a little bit different, right? It's not the same thing backing up a folder than backing up a database. So file copy methods, which is like the regular, when you do a backup of a folder, but file copy methods are not sufficient to back up databases in most cases. So database must preserve integrity by tracking operations as transactions. So at every given point, a very busy database, just think about the telephone company, where you got thousands and millions of customers doing changes constantly at any given time. Well, the problem with that is that the backup is in a given time. If I'm backing up something now, if I started a backup, whatever changes are made will not be covered by that backup, right? So there's a different technology when it comes to databases. Some databases, what they do, they have replication copies that are completed, like transactions between the master and the replica service are called. They are what is called point-in-time backups that must still be made to recover from errors or transaction rollback. The snapshot backups can be used for the last ditch recover and for logging and ordering changes. So in virtualization, we have this concept of a snapshot backup, and in databases too, in which basically you can take a snapshot of a database or a backup, just in case something happens, and then you can recover data from that snapshot. But again, so backups when it comes to databases, it's a complex topic. This is just a bare minimum introduction. Obviously, we will talk more about backups in other units. Now, we were just talking about the data that is useful, right? We're not talking about the system file or the OS. That's a different thing, right? So, because again, if you have the data, you can restore the OS. Well, maybe, right? In a company, so again, usually you have, that's why when we're talking about files and folders, we said that it is important to have one drive with the OS and the applications, and then you have the data separate, so that you do actually, it helps a lot when you have the OS in a separate drive. So restore hosts without having to manually reinstall operating system and application software. If you have to reinstall the operating system and then install the application and configure, that could be days and weeks, and who knows. Sometimes putting a system back the way it was, it's almost impossible, okay? So you need to have a complete system backup of the OS, right? What about if there is a virus, or if there is corruption, right? Or if there is a faulty disk storage? Again, having a OS backup is really important. The bare metal image based backups, again, in some OSs, you have this bare metal image, right? That what happens is that image has the most important stuff, and then you can get that image, and then on top of that, you put the other stuff. But anyway, so the many choices when it comes to OS backups. Again, keep the OS and the data backups as separate jobs. So we'll demonstrate that. We're gonna take a backup of the entire OS, and then we're gonna take a backup of only certain data, and we'll explain that better. All right. So Windows backup. In Windows, you can do two kind of things. You can do what is called the a Windows 7 backup and restore. Is compatible with Windows 7. It enables you to perform a select, a schedule, and ad hoc backups of the entire system. And then you have what is called the file history, which is in Windows 8 and Windows 10. So as files are modified, you keep a version track of the files. So let's say, for example, that you work on an important document and somebody comes in and made huge changes, and then they realize that there was a mistake, that those changes have not been made. Well, so this versioning in Windows allows you to go back in time and choose the way that a file looked, let's say, a week ago or a day ago or something like that. So we will demo all this as well. A schedule and frequency. Well, it depends on what the data is, right? Do you need to back up the data every hour or every week or every day? That kind of stuff. So again, it all depends on the data. So what are the recovery scenarios? The whole point is that everything you do in IT depends on the business requirements. What are the business requirements? Your boss may tell you, okay, I have that folder. I would like to back up that folder every 3 hours, right? Well, then when you do the schedule, that's what you do. The business required basically means that you need at least backup every 3 hours. So again, it all depends on what you are asked. Also, how much backup storage do I have? Because to backup data, you need storage, to backup that data. You may want to do backups very frequently, but if you don't have the storage, then you can't do that. So you're limited by the amount of data that you have to back up, right? How long do backups take to complete? If you're backing up a humongous drive, it may take a long time. So again, you're going to plan all these things. Do they interfere with normal operations? When you're backing up data, it consumes a lot of resources. So most of the time, backups are scheduled to be done at night or in the weekend. So those things need to be considered also. And how can offsite backups be facilitated? Is there money in the budget to back up offsite, right? Well, you better have the money. There's some company that they got to do that for critical stuff, okay? So obviously, if you have a backup, is because at some point you will need to restore data, right? So, and you want to make sure that when you restore data, the data it's good, it's not corrupted. So some of the software have what is called error detection when they do their backup. So you gotta be, and also most companies have nowadays what they do is they test those backups. So you gotta have a plan so that maybe every 3 months, every whatever, it depends on the data, you need to restore a backup to make sure that it works. Just because you back up a hard drive or a computer, whatever, it doesn't mean that it's going to work. It may have gotten corrupted, right? So it's important to plan for that. And also, are you sure that all the critical data is being backed up, right? You have to make sure, again, that all the data is being backed up. And again, so it's important to do those test restore. And so we get to the end of this unit. What did we learn over here? Well, we listed ways to share files and storage on a local network. We described means of sharing files and services on the internet, and we also explained the importance of backups and configure simple backup options. I'll see you on the next video.